Welcome to the Force. I am Bongeni Mutwa. The countdown to the much anticipated medium-term budget policy statement by Finance Minister Tito Mboweni next week Wednesday has begun. Workers in various cash-strapped state-owned enterprises that are in dire need of government bailouts are eagerly waiting to hear if the minister will come to their rescue. Government has spent 200 billion rand over the past 20 years on bailing out struggling SOEs. But the need for government assistance just won't go away, despite warnings by National Treasury that the country is on the verge of a debt crisis, with government debt currently standing at 87% of GDP. There remains a long list of state-owned enterprises that are in dire need of government funding. With thousands of jobs on the line, trade unions say government must provide the funding.
It will hopefully find resources to save SABC, SAA, Denial, Petro SA, and make sure that it saves thousands and thousands of jobs, because government must clean its own mess. It is the government that created the havoc at ESCOM and everywhere else. Government must clean the mess. There are resources, we believe, and in the economy, we are a very rich country when you look at our levels of resources. Government must find political will to fund SAA and to stop bleeding at SABC, Dinel and everywhere else.
But economists say chances of Mboweni announcing new bailouts for SOEs next week are slim.
I do not believe that we'll necessarily see extra funding incorporated into the mini-budget itself. And this is because in his speech last week outlining the recovery path, President Ramaphosa himself spoke about the government intending to obtain strategic equity partners to help fund SOEs and, if necessary, even to list some of these SOEs on the stock exchange. That would be an extremely welcome move, and it would defray the need of the government itself to actually step in to fund SOEs.
It's widely expected that Mboweni will allocate the 10.5 billion rand needed to fund SAA's turnaround strategy following Cabinet's decision recently supporting the move. But Jamin says even that is not a given.
I don't believe that the 10.5 billion rand that is due to help bail out SAA will necessarily be incorporated into next week's speech, because the government is already in discussions to obtain an outside shareholder in the venture. And in an interview made by Pravin Gordhan a couple of days ago, he hinted that basically by the early next year they should have some private shareholder.
But there may be hope for the public broadcaster.
The SABC and Denel are slightly smaller amounts that would be required, and it's possible that the government might step in those areas to supply immediate assistance. But even there, I think there is a possibility, especially in Denel's case, that the government will seek an outside shareholder.
A bailout for the SABC could help avert looming retrenchments of hundreds of employees. Bongeni Mutwa, SABC News, Johannesburg. Well, for more, I'm joined by Cosatu spokesperson Sizwe Pamla. Good afternoon, Sizwe.
Afternoon to you and the viewers.
Well, the countdown has begun. Of course, it's a very important mini-budget speech that we're looking forward to. It's always very important, but this time around, lots of workers are going to be looking ahead for some salvation from the minister. Do you think it's going to be forthcoming?
Well, we expect it to come. If you look at the numbers, I mean, we lost 2.2 million jobs in the second quarter. It tells you that we are in a precarious situation. So we have just had an economic recovery plan presented, meaning that there is the commitment to try and fix what is wrong. So what we cannot afford is a situation where government itself actually takes the lead when it comes to destroying jobs. Of course, we understand the enormity of the task. The problem with SOEs is that it's a problem that has been there as far back as 2010. Government has been talking about fixing the SOEs, finding solutions. It's sad that a decade later, we're still having service.
Well, she's back now.
No time to temperature.
Sorry, we lost you there a little bit. Recently, in the past few weeks, the Finance Minister came out publicly and said that his medium-term budget policy statement will not be popular. What's your interpretation of that statement from the Finance Minister?
Well, look, we in February 2020, where government has adopted an approach. Of course, you can even listen to the president when he was delivering the economic recovery plan, that there is an approach of a minimalist, there is no commitment to a developmental state. He's saying that because he knows that, firstly, he doesn't have a mandate of a minimalist state. The alliance, the ruling alliance, has a mandate of a developmental state. In all of the discussions, be it at NEDLEC and in the alliance discussions, we've agreed that we need a developmental state, and this outsourcing of a developmental framework to the private sector is the one that led to a 51% decline. So he's not addressing the issues that needs to be addressed. When he talks about taking decisions that are unpopular, it means that he is planning to take decisions that is not mandated to take, which is then a big problem for us, because we have never elected a Minister of Finance. We elected a president, and we expect that when a president presents a mandate, that mandate is going to be implemented, not that mandate is going to be reviewed by the Minister of Finance.
Now, looking at the long list of SOEs that at the moment are in financial dire straits and are looking for a bailout from the government, obviously not all of them are strategic, but also the whole issue of which SOEs are strategic and which ones are not. It's not an issue that is clear-cut. In your view, which ones are foremost that have to be bailed out, no matter what?
Well, look, all of them, they need to get the assistance that they need. Why? Because we keep saying that it's a bailout. Well, it isn't a bailout anymore. If you've been giving people for 2 decades bailouts, then it's no longer a bailout, it's a funding model. Because if it was a bailout, it means that you do have a funding model. A bailout is something that you do in extreme circumstances. But annually, for the last 2 decades, these SOEs have been receiving handouts from government. So they don't have any other funding model. So the idea that we keep saying that we're bailing them out, you can't bail something out for a quarter of a century. That is the only funding model that is on the table. So what we need to hear from people is, if you're unhappy with this funding model, bring us a new funding model. That's what we've been asking for. So we expect all of them, because there are people's livelihoods at stakes, there are jobs at stakes. They all need to receive the funding that they need. Number 2, look, we had a presidential SOE review commission in 2010 that was looking at actually rationalizing these SOEs and fixing them. A decade later, the president in June this year appointed an SOE Enterprises Council. Now that becomes a problem, because we don't know what happened to that council that was appointed in 2010. We don't know whether is it still in place. Has it been replaced by the new council, or this new council is doing the work parallel to the one that was appointed in 2010? That is really the problem here, is that you can look at what the Auditor General said about the SOEs last year, that wasteful expenditure has actually grown from 51 billion to 62 billion. But we have had 2 budget speeches this year, the February budget and the supplementary budget. And the National Treasury is saying nothing about actually taking some of the recommendations and the outcomes of that AG's report to try and figure out how to make sure that we turn around these SOEs.
Well, quickly, before we run out of time, I have to ask you this. Obviously, I have a vested interest in this. We all do here at SABC. Do you think the Finance Minister can afford not to fund or announce a bailout for the SABC on Wednesday?
No, he has to announce a bailout for the SABC. I mean, if you look at the fight against COVID-19, it has made it very critical for a government to have an institution like the SABC. The role that SABC has played in fighting the virus is very critical. So if we are to continue to have a state that is capable of taking care of South Africans, informing them of a deadly virus like we saw with COVID-19, we do need a functional and well-funded SABC.
Well, on that note, I have to thank you, Mr. Pamla. Thank you very much for your appearance on the show and your contribution. Well, that's how we leave it for this week. Up next, The Alternative Investor with Nastasia Arense. Stay with us.